Hi.
All right, and we're shooting live our third podcast with Gavin and I, and we're going to be talking about the coronavirus and the Tavistock Institute.
Good combination, and they do tie together.
I think they tie together in the idea that if you know more about the coronavirus and the Tavistock Institute, you're going to want to leave the city and move out to the country.
And leave the modern social world behind.
Yeah.
And get a goat farm.
It's funny, the more educated you become, the more you want to leave the city and just homestead.
It's true, yeah. I grew up outside Detroit, and now we live in the country, and I don't want to go back.
Yep.
And we have 2 goats, and it's great. So the first American died of coronavirus in Wuhan. It was a 60-year-old. Nobody's really sure why he wasn't evacuated.
Yeah, Vox was saying that this is going to make people think that Asians are really dirty, and that's going to cause a lot of xenophobia, all thanks to the coronavirus.
The coronavirus exposes the history of racism and cleanliness. Because if you're afraid of catching a disease from people who are known to carry the disease, coming from China, then that's xenophobic and racist. I think
it makes you terrible.
Xenophobia against a group of people that are known to carry a highly contagious illness right now is warranted. Would you agree?
I mean, they're not looking at them simply because they're Asian. They're looking at them because they're coming from a country that carries that virus.
Exactly. It's not them as the people. It's them as virus.
I have
carriers.
Asian friends, and I never look at them and be like, "You got the corona because your skin is Asian."
Exactly.
Like, that's insane. What kind of idiot thinks that other people think like that?
The doctor that actually discovered the virus, he died yesterday. Wuhan Hospital announced his death of whistleblower Dr. Li Wenliang, widely regarded as a hero in China for blowing the whistle on the threat posed by the Wuhan coronavirus. And his death has led to a massive outpouring of anger and grief online. Now, I noticed something really interesting in here, trying to cover up the guy's death to keep a social order.
See, I feel like this fits with the Hollywood script from the Netflix show Chernobyl, which I never watched because I really do believe that being afraid of epidemics like this actually makes you more susceptible to the virus itself. I feel like if you have a calm state of mind, drink your herbal teas like what I do, this might sound a little hippie-trippy, but I think that you're putting yourself in a better position to be more well-protected against this kind of shit. And isn't it convenient that this just happened to happen right at the same time as the Hong Kong protests, too? And those have been completely decimated ever since this virus broke out. I mean, I'm just going to say it's unfortunate. I'm not going to say that it was created for this purpose, to dismantle the protests.
Yeah, you can't say it was bioengineered because that's going to get you in trouble.
Is it now for like YouTube algorithms?
I don't know, but we know Google works closely with China. So.
Oh, they do. We were talking about this earlier, how Google and Twitter, they'll do whatever the Chinese government tells them to do. And the NBA, too. Yeah, like NBA players, they're not allowed to say anything negative about China, or else they get in big trouble.
That. Yeah, that was a couple months ago that story came out.
Why are all the popular people in America bending the knee to China? Like, why is that a thing? Who cares what they say? Who cares what they think?
It's a good question. I mean, our economy is almost built on them now.
Yeah, does that mean that they own us? That our powerful corporations can't go against China? Is that what that means?
I'm not going to bend the knee to China.
Because this is America.
So you brought up a good point about the Hong Kong protests because I hadn't even thought of that. Zero Hedge had written an article about where the virus might have come from. They published this article that they linked to on Twitter, which resulted in a permaban. So they're permanently suspended from Twitter now. Twitter said that they doxed somebody and banned them on grounds of targeted harassment. All they did was name a doctor who worked in this institute, and they said that they named him and his place of work, and that was targeted harassment. But the article is really interesting. White House asked scientists to investigate whether the coronavirus was bioengineered. Real reason behind the viral spread, we suggested, was that a weaponized version of the coronavirus, one which may have originally been obtained from Canada, was released by Wuhan's Institute of Virology, presumably by accident, China's only top level 4 biohazard lab, which was studying the world's most dangerous pathogens. So they're not even suggesting that it was bioengineered as a weapon. They're just saying that
Yeah, they were just studying it in a lab, and then it leaked.
I mean, human error. You can.
Yeah.
So again, they're not claiming anything. They're just investigating because nobody else is, and maybe for fear of China, and they were just laying out the points and asking people, hey, take a look at this and check it out. So number one of China's top virology and immunology experts was and still works at China's top-rated biohazard lab, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And we know this is true because Twitter banned them for it.
Like Hillary Clinton's emails, we know that they're legitimate because Hillary Clinton was telling people not to look at them, and CNN lied and said that it was federally illegal to look at them at the WikiLeaks.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, they said if you look at these, you're committing a crime.
Yeah, so you know that they're legit.
So some have affectionately called the institute the Real Umbrella Corp from Resident Evil.
Yeah, people are saying that it's an anagram, Corona for raccoon. Resident Evil is set in Raccoon City where the outbreak happened.
Anyway, so back to Zero Hedge here. Since 2009, Peng has been the leading Chinese scientist researching the immune mechanism of bats carrying and transmitting lethal viruses in the world. Number 3, his primary field of study in researching how and why bats can be infected with some of the most nightmarish viruses in the world, including Ebola, SARS, and coronavirus, and not get sick. Number 4, he was genetically engineering various immune pathways, such as the sting pathway in bats, to make the bats more or less susceptible to infection, in the process potentially creating a highly resistant mutant superbug. Number 5, as part of his studies, Peng also researched mutant coronavirus strains that overcame the natural immunity of some bats. And they're not saying that he created the virus and released it, but it does say which are resistant to any natural immune pathway, the superbug coronavirus, and now appear to be out in the wild. So it is extremely similar to the one that is out and about infecting people left and right. So they say, of course, that is all ancient history, and Zero Hedge was permanently banned from Twitter for raising such a conspiracy theory about a publicly searchable person working at a publicly searchable place. So most of the time, it looks like viruses are pre-existing in other animals. Now, the fact that they can't find an animal that was carrying this virus beforehand regularly is kind of strange. This is The Guardian. Pangolins may have spread coronavirus to humans. So first it was bats. Now it's pangolins.
That Chinese armadillo is so cute. I'd risk petting it for coronavirus. Look at that thing.
I just want to kick it.
No, stop.
But the Tavistock thing kind of ties into that because we were looking at their website, their current website, and how they talk about unconscious social change. And they're really just all about controlling the narrative, and that's exactly what China's been doing on their propaganda end. And Edward Bernays, who is Sigmund Freud's nephew, was involved in the Tavistock Institute. He called himself a propagandist, and that's exactly what China runs on.
Yeah, Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, helped to establish the Tavistock Institute back in the 1920s. He has said before on record that herd mentality is most easy to manipulate during times of war and epidemics. So what do we see happening right now? There's no war occurring, so we see an epidemic with the coronavirus. It's just very convenient for the establishment that there's always something happening, whether it's a war or an epidemic. And it makes, us collectively a little bit more susceptible to propaganda because we're in a constant state of fear, which is something that Edward Bernays talked about, famous psychologist, along with Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. And the thing that the three of them have in common is that they helped to establish the Tavistock Institute, which you can look up with mainstream media sources. And the Tavistock Institute is a nonprofit think tank that works in tandem with the United States and the UK government.
The creepiest part about all this is the mentions over and over and over of unconsciousness and unconscious processes. This is the Tavistock Institute's own website, tavinstitute.org.
And that's what I'm getting into. Dr. Coleman was an ex-MI6 agent who wrote a book about the Tavistock Institute. His research discovered that the number one funders of the Tavistock Institute are the British royal family, the Rothschilds, and a bunch of other people that you would not want to leave your children alone in a room with. Really bad people. And they are, again, they're right up there with the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. It is these three organizations that dictate societal perception, and they've been doing it since the 1920s. And the research I found is both horrifying and fascinating. I don't give in to fear anymore, and neither should you, but the Tavistock Institute was founded in 1920, and its first major project was convincing the American people that they needed to go into World War I. Because you see, at the beginning of World War I, people were much more nationalistic back then. They were not looking to go to war with Austria and get involved in a major conflict overseas. So, the Tavistock Institute, they worked on two fronts. They worked with the UK government and the US government in tandem to change societal perception, and they started an amazing propaganda campaign. They created posters of like giant apes with bats hurting white people with the title of "We need to stop this brute," and the giant gorilla would represent Austria. They did like blatant propaganda, the kind of stuff that optimistically wouldn't work today because people would simply laugh at it. But they had other posters that said it's the savages versus civilization or something like that, and the savages was the Axis alliance. And it was blatant like pro-war propaganda. And Edward Bernays and the rest of the psychologists, they came up with the term isolationists for the Americans that did not want to engage overseas, and the isolationists were looked at like they were idiots, like they were like afraid of like war and that they were cowards. So they completely changed societal perception in as little as 2 years to convince the UK people and the United States people to go to war.
Wow.
Yeah. And the thing is, the Tavistock Institute, we see they have a website. They're still going strong. And Edward Bernays, has worked with large corporations. They don't just work with governments. So Edward Bernays, with the Tavistock Institute, he was hired by United Fruit Company. United Fruit Company was in Guatemala back in the 1950s, and there was a new Guatemalan president that rose to power, and what he wanted to do was take like 40% of the land that was owned by United Fruit and give it back to local farmers. So what Edward Bernays did was he painted this new president as a dangerous communist and convinced people to overthrow this Guatemalan dictator who was just trying to give his land back to the people. So Edward Bernays is a master at making people think that what is actually evil is the right thing to do, whether it be going to war or whether it be taking farmland away from local farmers and giving it to large corporations. And we see this is still alive and well today. Nothing has changed. Since the 1920s, the United States and the UK, we have all been manipulated through propaganda from places like the Tavistock Institute, the Council of Foreign Relations, and the Trilateral Commission. End this stupid conflict of the left versus right, of different races fighting amongst one another. These are the enemies of the people.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, right. That's my spiel.
Well, we need to go into this more in depth sometime and just do a whole episode on the Tavistock Institute, because there's just so much creepy stuff just on their website right now that they're not even trying to hide.
Yeah,
that's just out in the open.
And we saw on the last podcast that the Tavistock Institute, they've teamed up with the National Health the National Health Service, and they're pushing hormone blockers for children.
This is a little article they released. Walls open, closed, sliding. Europe and our world today, creating unity out of diversity. A realistic aspiration or an idealized dream. And then they say here, old enmities are being invoked to drive nationalist populism. Brexit and the rise of far-right parties across Europe, fueling a wish for borders and walls to keep out the quote-unquote other, manifested in the increase of anti-Semitism and racism, and to protect what defines us and ours. Meanwhile, the borderless world of social media, offering instant access, expands. How are we to make sense of and orientate ourselves to all of this?
Wow. Listen to them. Right on the Tavistock Institute's website, they're saying things like, these anti-Semites want to create borders in countries. The racists want to create walls. But in a free and open society like the internet with no borders, that's where true intellectuals spread. These are the people that are funded by the Rothschilds and the British royal family.
Literally. Yeah, it looks like this is actually a conference that they're putting on. It's the title of the next Group Relations Conference from the PCCA, directed by Louisa Diana Brunner, from 27th to the 31st of August 2020 in the Netherlands. So we can go to that and
I'm down. You speak Dutch. Gavin speaks Dutch, and we're going to go to the Netherlands.
Not that Dutch.
Oh, well,
not
close
real,
enough.
Not real Dutch.
H.G. Wells was also in the Tavistock Institute, too. And he, of course, created War of the Worlds. He helped to create, like, stories and movies that were pro-war. You could even, like, I guess, argue that War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells could have been, like, a pro-war book. Now that it could have been created to, like, convince people of the glory of war. The Tavistock Institute is what gave World War I the name the Great War. That came from Tavistock. And the term isolationist, that came from Tavistock. This is all on Edward Bernays' Wikipedia page.
It's kind of interesting, though. I noticed on this, our staff page on their website is pretty young company. For the most part, it looks like
a lot of young faces. They're the most easily susceptible. All of these people think they're doing good. I promise you. None of the people who work at Tavistock consider themselves evil globalists. They all think that they're really righteous people. And it's so funny just like reading quotes from Edward Bernays where he will openly say, like, yes, societal perception is dictated by forces behind the curtain. He will say this very, very openly. Just look at these quotes that he has online if you want to look it up.
Me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. People are rarely aware of the real reasons which motivate their actions.
All right. He says, propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government. Look at that.
Sounds like he helped China out with their Wuhan coronavirus crisis.
They all take pages from his book.
Listen to this one. I like this. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes are formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of.
Yeah, what do you think he's referring to, people? He's referring to the Tavistock Institute.
Well, is that all we got for today?
Well, I was going to read this quote.
This big one?
So, the first quote right on Goodreads, which is a good source for quotes, is Edward Bernays, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate the unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as smoothly as a smooth functioning society. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind. And Edward Bernays is the one who founded the Tavistock Institute with Sigmund Freud and with Carl Jung, and we can look at the Tavistock Institute's website and see that they're still in control today, and that they'll blatantly say on the site, we control cultural perception. Then we see that the United States actually works with them and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. All of these organizations are still around today, and the Bilderberg Group. I forgot about them too. They're another perfect example of being a non-profit think tank. I mean, it's all very, very real. And so, basically, I just want to end this with, we've been controlled since the 1920s. That's when these organizations started to rise. So before the 1920s, the American people were not being manipulated on a large scale. There wasn't really propaganda happening. There was propaganda with like in the UK. There was propaganda in the Revolutionary War, of course, with that shooting in Boston, which like got people really mad at the British. But like that was the extent of the propaganda that they faced back then. Mm-hmm. It's just gotten way more out of control.
It's interesting that the Tavistock Institute referenced Brexit as their source for anti-diversity.
Yep.
You know, they could have had Trump and the Wall.
Well, yeah, the Tavistock is a British organization.
Yeah, they're based in London.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that they did so much. That's the thing, though. I'm surprised they did so much or were so involved with the U.S. government, and
yet they're British. It's because they're globalists.
Yeah, they were based in London, and the United Fruit. That's what I was thinking of. The was it Guatemalan government coup that the CIA.
So then the CIA organized a coup against Guatemala.
Thanks to the Tavistock, or they drummed up support.
Yep.
Thanks to the Tavistock Institute.
The true enemies of the people, right there. And they work with CNN, but that is another topic for another time. Anyways, thanks for tuning in. Have a good night.
Okay. I just pretended to drink this candle.